And I think we are live. We should be live. There's a tiny delay, so it should be appearing on YouTube in a second. But yep, I believe we are live. Hello, everyone. We're going to be waiting just a little bit, so it's 5 p.m. and we can all get started. But I can already check on YouTube. And for some reason, I can't see your screen there. Let me remove you and put you back. Oops, I think Andresa disappeared. Where is she? See, that's why it's good to start a little bit before. Let's see. So I see that some people are watching us already. Hello, everyone. This is Miguel. We're soon going to get started. And Andresa is back with us, I believe. Andresa, can you hear us?
Yes, I'm back. So are we now live to everybody?
Yes, I can see everyone's name and face there. Fantastic. We'll just wait a little more so that people can arrive, but just to explain to folks what's going to happen, that Andres and I are just going to introduce what we're doing here, and then we'll just leave Miguel alone so he can talk about everything that he's going to present us. Shall we get started? What do you think?
Very good.
It's 5 p.m.
Okay. Andresa, I'll let you get started.
Great. So my name is Andresa. For those who don't know, Coffee and Science, this time for the first time online. The Coffee and Science is actually a very informal, more intimate seminar series which began because we know that there are a lot of people at the University of Oxford doing research on Brazil. And we thought that we should get to know each other, to collaborate, to give each other feedback. And then we start this seminar series to drink a coffee together, get to know each other, and create opportunities for collaboration. So I can see that Chico has his coffee, and that's the spirit of the Coffee and Science. We drink a cup of coffee and get to know each other. And this time we are having it for the first time online for obvious reasons, because we are obeying the lockdown, we are staying at home. And we are lucky to have Chico Camargo with us, because Dr. Chico Camargo, he is a postdoc researcher at the Internet Institute. He is more familiarized with online platforms, as Chico creates computational methods for social sciences. So it's very lucky that Chico is organizing and sharing the seminar, this series. And I leave Chico to begin.
Thank you, Andresa. So welcome, everyone. Today we're kicking off the series with Miguel Conde. He's a journalist and critic with a PhD in literature and contemporary culture from the University of PUC-Rio. He is the book review editor of Words Without Borders magazine and the former curator of Flip, Brazil's biggest international literary festival. Miguel is currently writing a biography of Brazilian poet Ferreira Gullar and is an academic visitor at Oxford's Latin American Center. Miguel's going to be speaking to us about blood and memory in the Brazilian Sertão, the dystopian future and redemptive past of Bacurau. And I'm really looking forward to this because it's because of this talk that I finally have seen the movie. So I can't wait to see what Miguel's bringing it to us. And if you have any questions, just write them down on the chat. I'll be collecting questions so I can ask Miguel in the end. And I think without further ado, I'll just remove Andres and I from the stream here. And Miguel, the floor is yours.
Hi, welcome everyone, and thank you, Andres and Chico, for inviting me to take part in this series. Thanks to everyone who's watching. I know how difficult it is in the middle of this crisis to clear your head and find the time to think about something else, so I really appreciate your presence here. And my subject today, as you know, is Bacurau. It's a movie released last year in Brazil, directed by Kleber Mendonça Filho and Juliano Dornelles. And this is a movie about this small village in the Brazilian Sertão, which is this dry area in the backcountry of Brazil's northeast, which is the poorest region in Brazil. And so a few years from now, in the not too distant future, this village called Bacurau comes under attack and has to take up arms to defend itself. So Bacurau won the jury prize at the Cannes Festival, and it had considerable commercial success in Brazil, but it also caused a lot of controversy because some critics thought that Bacurau advocates or validates the use of violence as a solution for political disputes in Brazilian society. So Bacurau deals with political conflicts in Brazil through this Tarantino-like or B-movie aesthetic of blood and violence. And this is part of what makes it an interesting case, I think, for us to consider the intersections between art, entertainment, and politics in Brazilian culture today. But in this talk, I want to highlight other elements of Bacurau, which have to do with what we could call the political implications of time and space in the movie. So I'm going to begin with a general outline of what I want us to think about in this discussion today. And I will now share my screen with you to begin the PowerPoint presentation. Okay. So sorry for that. Here we go. So the title of my presentation is Blood and Memory in the Brazilian Sertão, the Dystopian Future and Redemptive Pasts of Bacurau. And in this first picture here, you can already have a glimpse of just how bloody these memories are. Bacurau is set in the near future, but as is often the case in dystopian movies, this future feels very much like a commentary on our present. It is not radically different from our own time. It only seems to aggravate current problems of Brazilian society. But what's interesting in Bacurau is that the reaction to these problems involves a certain recovery or a certain reenactment of the past. So this is not about traveling back in time to change history or something like that, but it's this idea that the past is not really over. It's not really past. So in Bacurau, hope for a way out of dystopia lies in the past of the Sertão. And the past holds possibilities for a different history, which can be brought back to life with the help of memory. In Bacurau, this is not just individual memory, but a collective memory. It's memory as a collective reenactment that brings the past back to life. In this reenactment, it's not simply a repetition. It's not about going back to the past, but rather bringing it into a new context. So it involves a transformation as well. So the Sertão in Bacurau is a place which holds the key for a way out of this dystopian future. And in this presentation, I will be mainly talking about how these two dimensions of time and space acquire a political relevance in Bacurau, how the movie looks for a certain model of insurrection in the past of the Sertão. But first, I just want to give you an idea of how the movie was initially received in Brazil. So you can see some of the initial reactions here. Bacurau portrays a Brazil that won't surrender. Bacurau is a testimony to the extinction of intelligent life in the Brazilian left. Bacurau and the Synthesis of a Brutal Brazil, Bacurau or Bolsonarismo in Reverse, and Bacurau is not about the present, but the future. So Bacurau was received by some critics as a sort of cinematic embodiment of the polarization of Brazilian politics in these last years. No matter what you think of this, the fact is that Bacurau is itself a polarizing movie. So I want to quickly point out what I think are the main features in how Bacurau tries to do politics. And these features include, I think, first, a combination of critique and entertainment, then a moralization of politics, and thirdly, politicization of space and time. So first of all, there is a combination of social critique and commercial enjoyment. Bacurau can be quite clearly called political in the sense that it deals with relations of power in Brazil, and it casts a critical look upon these relations. But at the same time, it resorts to conventions of movies usually more associated with commercial entertainment, like horror movies, westerns, slashers, etc. Bacurau attempts to straddle these two lines, and it has been fairly successful in doing so. So in political terms, you could say that Bacurau is trying to broaden its base, so to speak, going beyond the art circuit. It tries to be fun, approachable, and not challenging as many avant-garde movies. At the same time, Bacurau develops a diagnosis of Brazilian society, which is very straightforward. Good and bad are very clearly demarcated, and this demarcation here is put at service of a pedagogical intention. So the movie aims to entertain, but also to educate its viewers in the moral sense of teaching them to tell good from bad. And to do this, I'd say that it translates political differences into a binary opposition, so that the plural differences of politics are translated into a neither-or antagonism. And finally, Bacurau is always drawing our attention to political implications of space and time. So the memories, traditions, but also the aspirations for the future of Bacurau put the village at odds with the dominant power arrangements in the region. Politics in Bacurau doesn't concern only different opinions about the same things, however. It involves a perception of different things, what we see or do not see, what we pay attention to or not, what we remember or forget, what we listen to or ignore. And all of this has to do with space and time. So if we think of the first two movies by Kleber Mendonça, Neighboring Sounds and Aquarius, we will see that there is always a conflict around land use and land inheritance, which ends up exposing something about the history of land occupations in Brazil and how this is tied with current social conflicts. So just to go quickly back to this previous slide, most of the reviews of Bacurau so far focused on these first two aspects of the movie: how it challenges standard genre identifications, or how it reads political conflicts in Brazil through this kind of good versus bad dichotomy. I want to talk more about this third feature of the political implications of time and space in Bacurau. And keeping with the spirit of Bacurau, I divided this presentation as a kind of B-movie trilogy. And each chapter in this trilogy is a conceptual intersection of these different threads of time, space, and politics. So in the first one, Bloody Memories, I will be dealing mainly with time and the past in Bacurau. In the second, The Villagers' Gathering, I will compare how space is presented in Bacurau in contrast with the first two movies of Kleber Mendonça, Neighboring Sounds and Aquarius. And in the third, One of Us, I will make a brief comment about this us versus them confrontation and how I think it connects with political conflicts in Brazil today. So my first chapter is about how the past in Bacurau holds a promise of salvation, of redemption. And this inverts our standard way of thinking about history and time. So we usually think that hope is something connected with the future. Bacurau, however, suggests the idea that the future involves a sort of reenactment of the past. It's not a matter of a conservative attachment to the past, of longing nostalgically for the old times, but rather of being able to conjure the past to find your way forward in a certain situation. And I think a big issue in the movie is the issue of inheritance. The way the movie deals with this can be connected, I think, to the idea of inheritance that Jacques Derrida develops in his book, Spectres of Marx. That inheritance is not something passive, which just happens to you. To truly inherit something, you have to make it your own. As he writes here, inheritance is never a given, it is always a task. So it implies an action and also a choice. You have to confront your past and choose what to make your own. And Derrida also says, an inheritance is never one with itself. Its presumed unity, if there is one, can consist only in the injunction to reaffirm by choosing. So this moment of choice is also, in a way, what actually creates the inheritance. You have to choose which path to resort to, because the past is not one with itself. It is multiple, it has contradictions. So choosing your inheritance is also, to some extent, a creative act. Okay, so Bacurau is set a few years from now, as we are told, right at the beginning of the movie. And right in the first shot of the movie, you can see here that Brazil is engulfed in darkness. In the northeast is the only region where the sun is shining. So the village of Bacurau is a sort of utopian residue, a beacon of light in this dystopian future that the movie will present to us. And the sign pointing the way to Bacurau already suggests something peculiar about the place. It is more of a warning or even threatening sign than a welcome message. It says, "Se for, vá na paz," or "If you go, go in peace." Right from the beginning, however, we realize that the residents of Bacurau are not able to live in peace. When the movie begins, the village is already facing a crisis of lack of water. We learn that there is a river running near the village, but it seems to have been blocked, and the access is controlled by some kind of armed militia. So we arrive at Bacurau in a truck that is taking water to the city. And in this same truck also comes Teresa, this former resident who is coming back to the village to attend the funeral of her grandmother, Carmelita. And the funeral mobilizes everyone in the village. Carmelita is described as a kind of matriarch of Bacurau. Although she's dead, she somehow seems to live on in her offspring. As soon as Teresa arrives, she receives a pill from Damião, who is a kind of healer of Bacurau. And then during the burial of Carmelita, under the effect of this pill, Teresa has a vision of Carmelita's coffin overflowing with water. It's as if the coffin, or rather the body inside the coffin, is suddenly transformed into a water spring. So the movie begins with this metaphorical counterpoint between two images of water. On the one hand, this stream of water bubbling from Carmelita's coffin, suggesting something that continues to flow even after death. And on the other hand, the blocked river, right, which the citizens of Bacurau are prevented from approaching. And these two images imply, I believe, two different conceptions of the future. you have this collective and fertile inheritance of Carmelita versus some shady business involving local politicians and the restrictions of access to natural resources. So the main question developed in Bacurau will be something like, in this near future, imagine in the movie, is there a room for this inheritance or this legacy of Carmelita? Which means, is there a place for the village of Bacurau to exist? And what the movie suggests is that we are not just dealing with different ways of conceiving the future, but rather with opposing logics, which are incompatible with each other. There is this classic Western idea of this town is too small for the two of us. But the initial contrast between the river and the coffin will give way to a life or death confrontation. And there are a series of increasingly disturbing signs that something weird is going on in Bacurau. Someone fires at the water truck, then the cell phone lines go down, then Bacurau is wiped from satellite maps, and finally someone even spots a kind of small UFO, which turns out to be a surveillance drone. And then we finally learn in this outlandish kind of B-movie plot twist that this is all a part of a sabotage operation being conducted by a group of North Americans who has come to Bacurau in a kind of field trip for psychopaths, right? They are doing a safari where the citizens of Bacurau are the targets. And they are planning to hunt down and kill everyone in Bacurau. And they are being helped in this by a couple of state officials from São Paulo, which is the richest state in Brazil, and by the corrupt mayor of that region, Tony Jr. So this seems like a totally far-fetched plot twist, but for some viewers, I'd say it is a very plausible allegory, because it taps into this traditional 1960s left-wing political rhetoric of anti-imperialism, a rhetoric which explains the problems of Brazilian society, mainly as resulting from foreign exploiters and its corrupt Brazilian associates in the Brazilian elite. So Bacurau is playing with these B-movie conventions, but at the same time, it's making these conventions work inside of a well-established traditional rhetoric in Brazilian politics. So in face of this attack, the residents of Bacurau will have no choice but to fight for their lives. In the fight for the existence of Bacurau is also the fight for the legacy of Carmelita. So this is one of the redemptive paths suggested in the movie. The legacy of Carmelita is something that points beyond oppression and exploitation and indicates an alternative way of building the future. But the memory of Carmelita in itself is not enough to protect Bacurau from the attack. There is another dimension of the past, the memory of a violent past, which turns out to be crucial to ensure the survival of the village. This is the past which is stored in the Historic Museum of Bacurau, which the residents proudly allude to during the movie, but the contents of which we only get to see once the foreign hunters enter the city. So the coffin and the museum complement each other as the sites where the past is stored, but in such a way that it holds the potential to come back to life. And then we learn through the eyes of one of these hunters who inspects the place that this museum is actually dedicated to the memory of groups of cangaceiros, or outlaw bandits, which were once active in the region of Bacurau, and are remembered there in the museum through old newspaper articles, photographs, but also through the weapons that they used. So the museum turns out to be also a kind of arsenal which the people of Bacurau resort to in order to fight the foreigners. And they do this under the command of a 21st century cangaceiro called Lunga, who is a cangaceiro with a fluid gender identity, and he directs the counterattack of the people of Bacurau. Lunga appears almost like a shamanic figure. It's as if he's performing a channeling of the spirits of the cangaceiros, as if they are brought to life once again. And the movie plays with the idea that the citizens of Bacurau are not merely appropriating these models from the past, but are truly in conversation with ghosts or even possessed by the spirit of the dead. And the moment where this idea is made more explicit is when the ghost of Carmelita appears to Michael, the sniper who leads the foreign runters right before he's captured. So this channeling of the past brings a double kind of redemption. It saves the people of Bacurau in the first place, but it is also a kind of retroactive justification of the fights and the deaths of their ancestors. So redemption works both ways. As long as this past can be once again made present, their fight has not been in vain. They are not completely dead, so to speak. And just to finish this chapter, I would like to point a third element beyond the coffin in the museum that is also important for this redemptive encounter between past and present. And I'm talking about the pills, these drugs that Damião gives to the people of Bacurau. So the pill is the visual device that connects in the movie the linear time of the plot with this deeper temporal dimension where past and present are intertwined. The trance produced by the drug is a form of entering into another dimension of time. As Teresa takes the pill in the funeral of Carmelita and then sees the coffin overflowing with water, everyone in Bacurau then takes a pill in preparation for the fight. So the pill creates a disruptive temporality, which brings the past into the present, and in doing so, it creates the possibility of a different future. And the way this disruptive temporality is conveyed in the movie is through a kind of flashing or lightning effect produced by the montage. If you have seen the movie, you remember it. When the residents of Bacurau take the pills, these pills appear in a very quick image as a kind of lightning, as something which interrupts the linear sequence of time and changes the course of events. And finally, after the battle is over, there's this small detail, this scene where some people are washing the blood from the Bacurau Museum, and the person in charge says that she wants to keep this blood stain on the wall. So this bloody hand that you can see here on the wall becomes the new addition to the museum collection. And we can think that the blood on the wall is a way to remember the sacrifices made to keep the village alive. But I would say it is also a reminder concerning the future. We mustn't forget because we have to keep alert. So it's a trace of the past that goes beyond the past. It points towards an ever-present possibility, indicating that the past isn't really past. Okay, so this is what I had to say about time in Bacurau. And my second chapter is a bit shorter, and it concerns the way that space is treated in the movie. And what I want to highlight here is how the film brings together public and private space in a way that leads to the creation of what we could call a collective subject in the movie. And to develop this idea, I will also make some quick remarks on space in the first two movies directed by Kleber Mendonça, Neighboring Sounds and Aquarius, which are both set in a rich neighborhood in Recife, the capital of Pernambuco. It's a place where space, as you can see in these pictures here, has a very different configuration from that of Bacurau. So by collective subject, I mean that there is a collective dimension to action in Bacurau. And the movie emphasizes this by the way it deals with space, either by using several situations in which people are brought together in space, or by the way in which there seems to be a continuity between public space and private space, between the street and the house. And this is suggested right at the beginning of the movie when Teresa arrives bringing the suitcase full of medicine for the people of Bacurau. So Teresa is the one bringing the medicines, but then the task of bringing the suitcase inside is a collective effort. You see these hands creating a continuity between outside and inside. In the first two movies of Kleber Mendonça, Neighboring Sounds and Aquarius, this was almost the opposite. They are always calling our attention to how spatial divisions in Recife are connected with and reinforce social divisions. So I will make a very brief detour now because I think a contrast with these two movies will help us understand what Kleber Mendonça and Juliano Dornelles are trying to achieve in Bacurau. And I want to bring a literary reference which will help us understand what's at stake here. So this is a critic from Pernambuco, Luiz Costa Lima, talking about the poems of the most important writer from Pernambuco, João Cabral de Melo Neto. And Kleber, as you know, Kleber Mendonça is also from Pernambuco. So Costa Lima says, when João Cabral writes about the cane fields, it's always as someone who is looking at them from the alpendre. So the alpendre that he's talking about here was a common feature of the house of rich landowners in the plantations of colonial Brazil. It is this roofed structure in the front part of the house, like a front porch or veranda, where owners could rest and inspect their property. So they could see the sugarcane fields where slaves were laboring. So the alpendre is connected with the history of the plantations in colonial Brazil, and therefore with the history of slavery in Brazil. And it is no surprise that the house that the bad guys in Bacurau use as their base of operations is a house that has an alpendre. It's a sign that it used to belong to a big landowner. And another alpendre appears in one of the opening pictures in the beginning of Kleber's first movie, Neighboring Sounds. And in fact, the main characters in Neighboring Sounds belong to a traditional family of sugar producers who are now big landowners in a middle-class neighborhood in Recife. So they have gone from selling sugar to selling apartments. And the high-rise gated buildings for middle-class and rich people that are built in their terrains could be seen as the updated version in the movie of the alpendre. So I think this quote by Costa Lima goes directly into the heart of the issues that Kleber Mendonça wanted to address in his first movies. Because Costa Lima is raising a point which goes beyond the specific case of João Cabral, which is, how can you portray inequality in Brazil when you come from the elite? Which means when you don't really know what it's like to be on the lower part of the income distribution. So in the case of Kleber Mendonça, in his first movies, I think the question was, how do you make a movie about inequality in Brazil, filming from the upstairs of Brazilian society? And what I think was very interesting in these movies is that instead of trying to go beyond this limitation, Kleber Mendonça incorporates it. He makes it explicit. So he's not only depicting inequality in Recife, but he's also reflecting on his own observation point as a middle-class artist and intellectual. And the way he deals with this is by suggesting that there are things which the movie was not able to really see or to really show because of its point of view. So Neighboring Sounds highlights spatial divisions, right? Created by fences, by walls, but also even inside the same house, as you can see here, divisions between the living room, where the owner is, and the kitchen where the housemaid works. So people are always looking through fences or cameras. Space is always divided and hierarchical, right? There's this vertical hierarchical gaze. And something similar happens in Aquarius, which is Kleber's second movie. It's also a movie where the main conflict revolves around land use. The protagonist of Aquarius, Clara, who is played by Sônia Braga, owns an apartment in this old building in the beach of Boa Viagem that a developer wants to buy and demolish to create a new luxury seaside condo. Clara doesn't want to sell, so the developer tries to find ways to force her out. And the movie clearly sides with Clara in this conflict. Real estate development is connected in Aquarius with the inequality of land use in the city. And the movie highlights this with shots contrasting high-rise buildings in the nearby communities built by people without access to formal housing. So we tend to sympathize with Clara, but this conflict remains a conflict within the elite. And the movie makes this very clear when Clara uncovers a corruption case involving the developer. But instead of going to the press, she uses it as an instrument of blackmail to keep her apartment. She's prepared to let the corruption go as long as she's not bothered. So in Aquarius, we will also see these multiple shots emphasizing that there is something limited in the perspective of the movie. Clara is always looking from the window of her apartment to the city downstairs, which you can see here. Clara is in the hammock, and there is this window behind, right? And this is always a partial view. It's always a vertical gaze, which has hierarchical connotations. And again, as in Every Sound, there are multiple scenes in Aquarius showing how even when people occupy the same space, there is a hierarchical division of space between living room and kitchen, or even just foreground and background. So we see this in the scenes of Clara and the maid, or the developer and the doorman of the building, and even in this photograph where the maid's head is cut. So from the upstairs point of view, housemaids don't even have a face. They're not really seen as individuals. There is something of this dehumanizing perspective of slavery, which remains present in everyday life in Brazil, even in a left-wing family like Clara's family. So in Aquarius, even the protagonist is implicated in this logic of social hierarchies and exclusions. And as middle class or upper class viewers, we ourselves may feel that we are also implicated. So we are denied the comfort of simply identifying with the good guys in the movie, right? And Bacurau is a major shift in regards to all this. It's as if Kleber Mendonça is saying, okay, now I have to go beyond the fences. I have to look from the other side. I have to look from the downstairs point of view. And what happens when he and Giuliano do that is that all of these divisions and conflicts become something external to Bacurau. So they affect the village, of course, but inside the limits of the village, every resident seems to be in equal footing with each other. Even gossip, which can be one of the most oppressive things of living in a small town, in Bacurau is just part of this collective dimension of life in the village. So decisions there are taken in public gatherings, and the village has a communication system which grants information to everyone at the same time, and the camera moves freely around Bacurau. It's a community which is kind of the opposite of the gated buildings in Recife displayed in neighboring Sounds and Aquarius. And the consequence of this is that the audience of Bacurau is not really led to question their own perspective as in the previous two movies, but is rather invited to simply identify with the good guys of Bacurau. And this brings me to my third point, which is my major caveat about Bacurau. And this concerns the way in which the movie invites a certain kind of audience, a certain kind of spectator, to identify with the people of Bacurau. And in doing that, I think Bacurau ends up erasing the gap between the downstairs and the upstairs point of view, or at least between the downstairs and the left-wing part of the upstairs. It tends to suggest to a certain kind of viewer, at least, that we are all Bacurau. The first shot of Bacurau, where the Northeast is the only region in Brazil where the sun is shining, is not so different from the electoral map of the 2018 presidential election won by Bolsonaro, where the Northeast was the only region in which the PT candidate, Fernando Haddad, won. And if you think about it, Bacurau is really a very peculiar place for a small village in the countryside, right? People there seem to have this easygoing attitude towards drug, towards sexuality. They are also very welcoming to fluid gender identities, to non-conventional marital arrangements. So Bacurau is this LGBTQ-friendly village where people are taking this pill, which is not so different from the ecstasy pills that people are taking in big urban centers. But the decisive moment of identification comes towards the end of the movie, when the people of Bacurau are counting the residents who were killed in the attack and shouting out their names. And among these names are one Marielle and one Marisa Letícia. So the first one is a reference, of course, to Marielle Franco, the socialist councilwoman from Rio de Janeiro, who was murdered in March 2018. And this could suggest simply a broad analogy between the fight of Bacurau and the fight for democracy in Brazil. The mention of Marisa Letícia, however, goes one step further. It makes a direct reference to former President Lula's ex-wife, who died in 2017. So if the dead of Bacurau are also the dead of Brazilian left-wing parties, it seems logical to assume that the fight of Bacurau is also the fight that these parties are fighting. So the movie gives left-wing viewers the comfort of feeling on the right side of history. In a period when the Brazilian left-wing seems to be against the ropes, the movie is reassuring. It is not just that the people are on our side, that our fight is the people's fight, but that in a way, we are the people. So Bacurau, in my opinion, allows its viewers and even invites them to elide the same gap which was so important in the first two movies directed by Kleber Mendonça. There is a scene in the movie where the villagers divide the donations given to them by the corrupt mayor, Tony Jr. And the village doctor, Domingues, warns the people of Bacurau against a specific medicine which was donated. It is a mood stabilizer named Brazol 4, which, according to Domingues, makes you stupid and numb. So there is a clear contrast in the movie between this medicine and the drug which is distributed by Damião. The pill of Damião can be seen as a catalyst for change, and the movie Bacurau itself seems to me to aim for a similar effect. Bacurau wants to be a catalyst for action, like Damião's pills. But we may ask if the kind of moral comfort that it offers its viewers isn't closer, in fact, to the effects of Brazil 4. Bacurau is a cathartic movie for sure, but catharsis can also be soothing. So this being said, I don't think we should reduce the movie, however, to its worst aspects. I certainly don't agree with the idea that Bacurau is Bolsonarismo in reverse, there might be a validation of violence as the strategy of last resort in a critical situation, but this is very, very different from the kind of daily celebration of violence which is at play in Bolsonaro's rhetoric. The movie does suggest, in my view, a problematic conflation between the struggle of poor people in Brazil and the struggle of major political parties. But it also gives us elements to question how the left might still be complicit with a certain notion of progress and of the future that many times ends up aggravating social divisions and inequality. So the way Bacurau deals with time and space, I try to show, challenges usual ideas about progress in Brazil and tries to point us towards a different relation with history and with public space that goes against the dominant patterns of social division in Brazilian history. And that was my presentation, so thank you very much. And now I will stop sharing the screen so that Chico can come back.
All right. Thank you so much, Miguel. This was really, really interesting. It was. I find that for someone who normally doesn't go as deep into what movies are about, it was just really cool to see this dive, especially as you kind of built it towards the end as this critique. Really super interesting. I don't know if folks have got questions. I'll be keeping an eye here on the chat, but I actually had a question about the fact that there was this, I forgot the word you used, but like this collective identity, this collective character. At least from my impression, it's not so common to have movies where, so to say, the main character is a city or a group of people or a village.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder, especially in comparison to the other two movies, do you think telling a story where the main character is Bacurau itself, do you think that opens doors for certain kinds of storytelling? Do you think it closes some doors? Because I would imagine maybe it's harder to identify with a village. I don't know. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think it's not common at all. As you said, the standard way of doing a movie or telling a story is you just have like a protagonist, right? Who is the main character, and the movie will be the story, the trajectory of that character. And I think there is a political implication also in this idea that no one is really more important than any other person in the movie. Of course, you have these characters who are in the foreground of the movie, but they sort of recede in the background in other moments. Because Bacurau, I think, is really about the way of life of that place, this idea of Carmelita's inheritance. So it's about the way that the community lives, the values that they embody. So some people said that so Bacurau is an ode to violence, that it makes violence into the solution for political conflicts in Brazil. But if you think about it, I don't think even the cangaceiros or the bandits are the main guys in the movie, right? I think they're just this self-defense measure that Bacurau has to take in order to keep on going. But the movie, I think, is really about Carmelita's inheritance, right? And so it is sending a message in a moment where Brazil made a turn towards a conservative project. And so Bacurau in the Northeast seem to embody, to Kleber and Juliano, a different idea of Brazilian society, a different idea of what Brazilian can be. And I think that's what the movie is really trying to show.
I wanted to pick on that point that you made in the end, this sort of idea of what Brazil could be, because a big component of the current political turns in Brazil was a fight against corruption. You know, Bolsonaro rose to power as someone who wouldn't be corrupt like the others before him, and things like that. There's been a lot of protests so to say, against corruption. And if I were to assume that, I would imagine that a lot of people would see Bacurau against the corrupt politicians and side with them simply because of that. But instead, the movie really polarized audiences.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you think that comes from?
Yeah, because, I don't think Bacurau is really just doing like an overall discourse against corruption. It is associating corruption and violence with a certain kind of politician, of person. So you have this couple from São Paulo who is a rich couple. They say that they are from the richer part of Brazil, that they are white, like the North Americans. So they are not really, they don't want to be Brazilian, really. And if you look at the corrupt mayor from Bacurau, Tony Jr., he seems to have just popped out from a PSDB reunion, right? He uses this shirt, has his hair with gel, all very tight. So I do think that Bacurau is taking a stand which goes beyond just like a generic discourse against corruption. I do think it's taking a side. It doesn't fear to take, it's not afraid of taking a side in these political disputes going on in Brazilian society right now.
Mm-hmm. So I've got a question here from Andresa, actually, saying that the movie seems to kind of guess a bit of the recent Brazil, but it's important and very possible to imagine that the actual conception and making of the movie came before. Do you know where that came from? And
yeah,
and also talk a little more about the reception of the movie in like wider audiences.
Yeah, it seems that Bacurau developed, it's an old idea of Kleber and Juliano. They've been working together for a long time. So Juliano was actually, if I'm not mistaken, the art director of Kleber's first two movies. And it seems that initially Bacurau was conceived as this parodic take on documentaries about the poor regions of Brazil. It seems that Kleber and Juliano were at a movie festival and they were looking at these documentaries, which seemed to them to be treating their subjects as really like stupid, naive people. And they wanted to do a spoof on that. And you can still get a bit of this parodic idea, I think, when the North Americans come into the movie, right? It's a caricature of American people, and so the movie still has a bit of that, but then it went into a completely different direction. And I don't know if Bolsonaro was already in power when the movie was being filmed, but certainly Dilma had already been impeached, Temer was in power, so I'm sure that these things were in Kleber's and Juliano's mind.
So there's someone else here, Dominique Santos, has raised a very, very clever point, I think, saying that, don't you think that perhaps Bacurau's reception wouldn't be that polarized if it were not for the context with social media and algorithmic distribution of news, and in particular, a big presence of Bolsonaro and his robots on Twitter and things like that. Basically, this sort of algorithmic, so to say, boosting of reception. Don't you think that that might be actually a big part of the reasons behind the reception of Bacurau, that it landed on a tweet storm, you could say, that includes Facebook and WhatsApp?
Yeah, no, I totally agree, but I think this is a valid point for any public event, any public discussion going on today, in most places. So certainly in Brazil. Of course, there's a particular history of polarization in Brazil, which cannot be explained just through this, technological context of social media and these new platforms. But surely this is a big part of it. And I think it's really a question of, whether Bacurau manages to even reach an audience outside of this division, right? Can it speak to the other side of this division? Or is it a movie which is actually speaking also somehow inside the bubble, right? I'm not really sure. I don't have an answer to that, but I do think that the movie is playing into this polarized media environment, which social media certainly has reinforced in these last years.
And kind of carrying on with that point of talking to other audiences, Carla here in the comments is saying thank you for the presentation and saying that while Bacurau, the village, is portrayed collectively, the American characters and the German guy, they're all portrayed as individuals. Can you tell us a little more about the meaning of their individual actions?
Yeah, I think, you can say that each one of them has a particular specific sort of perversion, it seems. Like the sniper Michael cruelly, randomly starts killing people, even his allies. There is a woman with the machine gun who gets sexually aroused out of killing people. So each one has a particular mental disorder, it seems, but they're all pretty psychopathic. I think they are, deranged characters. I don't think they are very complex figures at all. And one thing that Kleber Mendonça says is that he wanted to sort of turn the table on the usual manner in which Indians were presented in classic Westerns. Because Indians were just these savage, cruel guys, right, in the Westerns, the American Westerns. So in Bacurau, he wanted to portray the North Americans as kind of the Indians of the movie, turning the tables on this standard cliched image of the other in American Westerns.
That's such a good point. I think on that note, Miguel, I'm just going to wrap it up unless anyone has any other question. I'll just remind everyone that the Coffee and Science Seminar Series is an initiative that's by the Oxford University Brazilian Society with the Brazilian Studies program at the Latin American Center. I've left some things at the description, and I see we are going to have another question. Just summing it up, the Coffee and Science Seminars are a space for researchers in Oxford, people with research about Brazil, to get to know each other, to exchange information and feedback about what they're up to. And now we're going to have two more comments here. One by Carolina Maia. She's saying, thank you for your presentation, Miguel. Could you please talk a little bit more about the Brazilian couple helping the North Americans? Do you think they could maybe call Brazilian whiteness into question?
Call Brazilian whiteness. Yeah, for sure. This is this is highlighted in the movie, in this dialogue, when they say that they are not really Brazilian. They have European, I think, ancestors, and clearly the people of Bacurau have a very different color, right? They are black people or brown people. They come from a different background. They are descendants of slaves and Indians, we can think. And this couple from Brazil is sort of the current time version of the colonizer, I think. If Bacurau is playing into these relations between current conflicts and the past history of colonization and slavery in Brazil. And this is something that appears a lot also in the previous two movies by Kleber Mendonça. In Aquarius, there is this moment where the developer talks to Clara, and he says to Clara, I can see that you are someone who has come from, who has had to make a lot of effort to come up in life, because I can see from the color of your skin, from where I can see from where you come, from the color of your skin. And so Kleber, I think, is also always very attentive to the way in which small details are revealing of the hierarchies, the divisions in Brazilian society. And certainly it is also the case with this couple from São Paulo, who act as the local associates of the North Americans in Bacurau.
Yeah. And one final question here from Jessica Frazão. She's saying, well, thanks for the presentation. In her city, Blumenau, she had to organize an independent session because cinema and malls, they did not have space for Bacurau. So she wants to ask, how do you see the situation of the distribution of Brazilian cinema in Brazil, since even a movie as Bacurau didn't actually make it to many movie theaters?
Mm-hmm. I don't really know the Brazilian cinema market that well. The only thing I can say is that Bacurau did reach a broader audience than art movies usually do. Certainly a much wider audience than the previous two movies by Kleber Mendonça. I think it had around 700,000 viewers, which is not so much, as the Avengers, which can have like 20 million viewers, but it's still a considerable audience for a Brazilian movie, which is kind of an art movie. But it's, this story that Jessica is relating is just one more very sad story about polarization and even censorship in Brazilian society today, right?
Wow, yeah. And I think that all gives us a lot to think about. Just want to say, Miguel, thank you so much again for letting us start this seminar series in such great style. And hopefully this video will stay here recorded so people can just refer back to it whenever they want.
Thank you so much, Chico, and thank you for everyone who watched.
Thank you, and we'll see you in the next Coffee and Science.